The room presents itself as an ordinary environment where attention can rest without needing to organize or defend itself. Light behaves in a predictable manner, reinforcing the sense that perception and environment are cooperating.
Surface details appear quietly, without asking to be remembered or interpreted.
Minor shifts register as part of an expected flow rather than meaningful change.
Illumination supports the assumption that time is progressing normally.
The environment continues functioning without demanding attention or correction. Visual balance allows awareness to remain passive.
Change unfolds gradually enough to blend into expectation.
Familiar textures quietly reinforce continuity.
Nothing within the frame encourages urgency or analysis. Object placement feels intentional without implying purpose. The room provides no signal that interpretation is required. Clarity reduces cognitive effort. The space feels complete without implying narrative.
Nothing in the room asks to be remembered later. The present moment feels sufficient on its own.
There is no indication that attention should heighten.
The environment supports passive observation.
Everything functions within expected limits. The room neither advances nor retreats. Nothing suggests that this moment will differ from the next.
Expectation stays dormant.
Perception encounters no resistance.
Nothing feels pending.
The room feels complete, and there is no immediate reason to believe this will change.
The room still appears ordinary, though its response to light introduces a small contradiction that does not immediately ask to be resolved.
Brightness settles where it would normally fade, creating a quiet inconsistency that remains unresolved.
The link between object and effect loosens slightly, without producing an obvious error.
Orientation appears to shift without any accompanying sense of movement.
Shadow behavior begins suggesting structure without a clear source.
Illumination favors a direction that lacks a visible explanation.
Reflections begin referencing positions that feel slightly incorrect.
Distance stops functioning as a reliable visual guide.
Surface responses duplicate without an identifiable cause. Directional certainty weakens while the space remains calm. Light begins organizing itself into patterns that were not previously present.
Object posture begins implying intent without motion. Depth cues quietly exchange roles.
Expected gradients reverse without signaling urgency. Correspondence between form and outcome weakens gradually. Single inputs begin producing multiple visual outcomes. Spatial logic bends without collapsing.
Orientation shifts begin to feel selective rather than random.
Separation between object and surface begins to erode. Light begins referencing the object rather than its source.
Distance stops predicting clarity. Hierarchies of attention quietly dissolve.
Alignment errors accumulate without signaling escalation.
Causal direction becomes ambiguous.
The room continues functioning while becoming harder to intuit. The room continues responding to change, though its reactions now arrive slightly out of order. Visual effects persist beyond the moment that should have completed them.
The space appears to carry more than one moment simultaneously.
Multiple temporal cues coexist without resolving into a single present. Cause and effect begin disagreeing about when events occur. Expectation starts arriving before observation. Visual information begins repeating instead of refreshing. The moment feels present without feeling current. The room appears to carry visual memory alongside perception. More than one moment seems to occupy the same visual space. Effects no longer conclude when their causes end. Recognition now arrives after perception rather than alongside it. Time indicators begin disagreeing quietly.
The present starts feeling slightly retrospective.
Object and environment no longer feel simultaneous.
Change begins to feel buffered rather than immediate.
The scene gives the impression of having already occurred. Temporal reference points begin sliding without direction. Visual memory overlaps with current input.
The scene feels slightly behind itself.
Completion no longer follows change immediately.
The present stretches without advancing.
The room behaves like a memory still forming.
The scene appears to wait for itself.
Time no longer asserts a single position within the room.
The room presents a configuration that feels known without recalling how that knowledge was acquired.
Conditions resemble stability closely enough to reduce further questioning.
Visual cues reorganize into patterns that no longer request interpretation. Alignment restores itself without referencing earlier uncertainty. Balance returns quietly, without resolving what preceded it. Light resumes behavior that aligns with expectation rather than explanation. Visual complexity reduces itself without signaling completion. The environment stabilizes into a readable state.
Orientation settles into a position that discourages further interpretation.
Cause and effect appear to reconnect without commentary.
Spatial logic reasserts itself without acknowledging interruption.
Continuity replaces variation without announcement.
The room no longer implies progression or delay.
Nothing within the frame suggests a need for alteration. The scene feels sufficient without asserting finality.
Stability persists without indicating duration.
The present moment loses distinction from others.
Temporal markers lose relevance when repetition feels exact.
Recognition replaces curiosity.
Nothing appears unresolved.
The environment offers closure without explanation.
Nothing suggests a next moment.
Observation no longer produces discovery.
The room appears ready to be observed again.